Welcome to everyone. We're glad to have you on this summer morning. And today we are going to start with a grounding meditation to just help us realize we're right here, right now. So with your feet on the floor, if everyone could mute yourselves, that would be nice. Thank you. And taking 2 or 3 deep breaths all the way in and all the way out. Being aware of the nostrils, the throat, the esophagus, the lungs, the chest, and the air. The air going in and out, and the air in your room, in the space you're in. Being aware of your skin, and the sense receptors all over the body. Sensing all of the beings together in this room. Sensing everyone's sincere intention to be happy and safe. To support one another. And when you're ready, returning to the group. Today, we're going to focus on equanimity, probably the most lauded quality in the Dharma. And first, we'll do a meditation cultivating equanimity. And then we get to do mindful movement with Emily. Thank you, Emily. We're always so lucky to have you. And after that, I'll share about equanimity and how we might nurture it in our hearts and minds and lives. So first, just a few words about it before we sit. Equanimity embraces freedom and compassion, and it's founded on wisdom. It's called an unshakable stillness in the heart. And it's what allows us to remain steadfast despite the sometimes violent ups and downs of life. It helps us stay centered, rooted, in our values and on our spiritual path. And so when you look at the roots of the word in the language of the Buddha, it's the quality that allows us not to get caught up, either getting inflated or deflated because of what happens to us. It allows us to stay balanced regardless of the external circumstances or the internal ones. And by that, I mean the mind's influences and fluctuations, its moods, the conditioning we've been subject to, our memories, our preferences, and our agendas, all the things that contribute to constriction and feelings of stuckness. So, with that in mind, let's practice. So, taking an alert, upright position on the chair or cushion, with the spine ascending, the head balancing on the spine, then allowing the other muscles and places in the body to release, with the spine as support. You might take a couple purposeful breaths, and being aware that you are sitting and breathing. That you are a body on a chair or cushion. Feet and body held by the earth. With the head and mind reaching upward to the heavens, to the vastness of the sky. Feeling the solidity of the body, its weight, and focusing on the breath as your anchor, as your object of attention. Or if you prefer, sounds. now, here, settling into right here, right now. Aware of the sensations of breathing, not rushing, just allowing each breath to take its time. Establishing mindfulness of the breath. Now, here, If a sensation or emotion or thought arises that seems to demand attention, just allowing the mind to observe that. And when it's no longer predominant, going back to the breath. Just being aware of what arises with a kind, non judging attention. Aware of pleasant and unpleasant. Noticing if there is any preference, if there's tension from clinging or from pushing away, and not judging, but perhaps inviting any attachment or aversion to soften. And then abiding with what is in this moment. And if there is aversion or clinging, being neither for nor against either one. This is how it is in this moment. The present, the present moment cannot be different than it is. Returning to the breath again and again. Deeply accepting our unfolding experience. surrendering to being a body. Letting go of any sense of doing, even doing equanimity, simply being. Coming back in your own time. Opening the eyes. The Four Noble Truths teach us that suffering is caused by clinging and attachment, and that liberation is possible. And to that end, the Dharma teaches that equanimity, like mindfulness, like concentration, loving kindness, and other positive mind states can be cultivated with practice. So, before we go to cultivation, I just want to say a little bit more about equanimity. The English word comes from two separate Pali words that the Buddha used, upekkha and tattramajhatata. Upekkha, which is the more common word that we're used to hearing, means to look over, to sort of look comprehensively. And that refers to equanimity that arises from observation without being stuck emotionally by what we see. Upekkha connotes a spaciousness, a seeing with understanding, seeing the context. For example, if you're at a party and someone comes up and starts belittling you and saying vile things about your appearance or your demeanor, what you're doing, you probably would start to take it personally and feel offended. But if you knew that the person had a brain injury or suffered from a mental illness that caused them to feel aggressively hostile out of fear, you'd realize it's not personal. It's not about you. And so by not reacting out of an insulted sense of self, there would be a greater possibility to respond out of wisdom and kindness. So that's that part upekkha describes a sense of seeing a comprehensive picture. And the other Pali word, tramtajahatata, is a long compound word that comprises several simple Pali words, but put together, it means to stand in the middle of all this. So it means not standing to the right or the left so that you would tip over if you were sort of balanced on a plank, for instance. Instead, balancing in the center. And this inner balance or stability comes from within, from wholeness and integrity, from practicing ethics. And it makes a person sort of upright, like a ballast that's deep within a ship's keel, and it keeps the mast upright in strong storms. So even if it's tossed by external circumstances It remains true to what's deep inside. And in Buddha's teaching, equanimity is one of the four divine abodes called in Pali the Brahma Viharas. And the others are metta, or loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy. And equanimity includes those others. Because without the warmth of metta, compassion, and joy, equanimity would be cold indifference. Equanimity is also important in that it is the last of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So by listed last, it means it's the culmination of all of the other 7 factors. And if you want to know what they are, they're mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, and concentration. And each builds on and includes the ones that come before it. So equanimity contains them all. Gil Fronsdale offers this illustration of equanimity and the other divine abodes. Say you're watching a puppy, cute little puppy playing around in the grass, and your heart softens. You feel metta, loving kindness for this being. And then another dog comes along and they're tumbling around and they're playing, and the dog is having a blast, and you feel sympathetic joy. And then the other dog, who's larger, accidentally sort of rolls on the puppy's leg and it yelps. And you feel compassion. And then the puppy runs after a ball, excited to catch it, and it rolls down a sewer. It's gone. And the puppy's disappointed. Well, you feel equanimity. The puppy is deflated, but you're really not. You hold the puppy's disappointment in balance because you know the context. The puppy just had all this fun with its friends, and it in the future it will have other balls to chase. And it will also face trials and disappointments and probably pain. So equanimity keeps us balanced in the face of the ups and downs of life. In what the Buddha called the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, success and failure, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute. So those are the circumstances which are largely out of our control, that can, if we don't have equanimity, they can make or break us. And the Dharma teaches us that we can maintain integrity, wholeness, and wisdom to withstand the adversity and the fortunes that life brings. And what it's really doing at bottom, I believe, is it's helping us refrain from identifying the self with these external circumstances. Because if we do that, we suffer. If we're successful, it can make us feel arrogant and superior to other people. And that causes us suffering from greed, from a sense of separation, and from the aversion we feel inside for others. And if we're unsuccessful, we feel like we're a failure. We have no faith in our own worth. And both attitudes delude us about the meaning of suffering and genuine happiness. So, equanimity is an inner stillness that transcends the 8 worldly winds. And so we can cultivate and practice with equanimity bit by bit. Each moment when we glimpse it, experience it, however briefly, it adds to our capacity to go back to it again and again. And so before I go really talk and focus on cultivating, I just want to read what the Buddha said in the Dhammapada describing it. As solid as a mass of rock that is not stirred by the wind, so a sage is not moved by praise and blame. As a deep lake is clear and undisturbed, so a sage becomes clear upon hearing the Dharma. Virtuous people always let go. They don't prattle about pleasures and desires. Touched by happiness and then by suffering, the sage shows no sign of being elated or depressed. So, of course, we will be touched by happiness and suffering, and yet it is possible to maintain a stillness and an integrity. So, how do we grow it? How do we grow this quality? Well, we can do that by carefully watching, by using mindfulness, awareness, to see what it's like when we're balanced and open-hearted, and then perhaps more instructively, to see what it's like when we lose our balance and we become reactive. I mean, that's probably better than just pursuing equanimity, because that's like pursuing nirvana itself without using the tools of the Eightfold Path. In fact, equanimity is translated in some of the early texts as nirvana, in Pali nirvana. So Christine Feldman, a fabulous teacher in England, the guiding teacher of Gaia House, says this: like kindness, joy, and compassion, equanimity is not a state, but describes a relational way of being with life that rests upon a profound understanding of the intrinsic nature of change, unpredictability, and non-self that is at the heart of all events and experience. So it rests upon a profound understanding that change, unpredictability, and non self is at the heart of our human life. And that sounds hard, perhaps, but I believe that impermanence might be the easiest way in. Non self sort of befuddles people, but impermanence gets us to an understanding that we are not a fixed, constant self. If we investigate the present moment, we see that we are actually like a river. That is actually a metaphor the Buddha used. Is a river a single entity? Can we even say the Potomac River? Well, if you're standing at Haynes Point looking out at the Potomac, the water in front of you is comprised of individual molecules that will never be in this place again and will never be the same again. In 10 minutes or an hour or a day, the water that's flowing by will be a different temperature with a different composition of sediment, algae, etc., depending on the changing conditions of the watershed that's upstream. So the water rushing past is constantly changing, depending on 1,000 conditions, just like we are. And the more we can understand that we're an ever-changing river or a fluid process, the more we can really kind of get that at a gut level, the more readily we can access equanimity. We need to accept our own vulnerability, our human nature, to realize equanimity. And what I mean when I say our human nature and our vulnerability, I mean our tendency to get stuck due to conditioning, preferences, all the memories, agendas, all the mental formations that close our hearts and prevent us from seeing clearly. And that relates to impermanence because the chances are when we experience a difficulty, a moment of difficulty, we tend to experience it as ourself. We think it reflects us, usually unconsciously. We think this says something bad about me as a self. And so we can get stuck because we want to push away that unpleasant experience or distract from it. And so our stuckness comes from the idea that we are a constant separate self. Dukkha and suffering, dukkha, which is suffering, and a sense of a fixed self, they mutually reinforce each other. This sense of a self creates dukkha, and dukkha kind of because we identify suffering as saying something, reflecting something about ourselves, it perpetuates the idea of a unchanging self. So let's do a reflection. Sitting upright, closing the eyes if that feels right, or just looking downward. And taking a couple of deep breaths. And call to mind a difficult situation in your life. One that out of a scale of 1 to 10 is a 3 or 4. Pausing to get into the heart space of it, the head space of it. Feeling it in the body, the heart, the mind. Is there a belief underneath this difficulty that it says something about you, about your qualities, your worthiness, your character? Are you believing this suffering is a reflection of yourself? And is it possible to tease out the pain related to this belief so that even without this belief, there might be some suffering involved? But would it shift? So, as we go through our lives, attentive to equanimity, when we see that we're constricted and not balanced, we're reactive, clinging or pushing away, we might ask how we are relating to this. Is there a sense that it is based on or contributes to a sense of the self? And is it possible to aerate that with an appreciation for how impermanent we are, and how we're constantly changing? Earlier today, when you woke up, you may have been irritated or grumpy, or the opposite. And then, a half hour later or 2 minutes later, maybe something pleasant happens. You notice a couple of birds drinking from a puddle or something else, and you feel joy. And in between those experiences, there could have been 1,000 memories and preferences and regrets and longings that swept through your mind and heart, changing how you feel. And each moment feels like the authentic you, the authentic self. And in that way, you can understand the Buddha's metaphor that we are like a river. And this condition, I mean, we are so conditioned, especially in the West, with its emphasis on individuality, to not question that we are a separate, constant self. And we can be a bit more free if we realize that a difficult experience comes from causes and conditions, from all of our conditioning and our preferences and external circumstances. And that appreciation helps us when we're experiencing, for instance, anger. It might help us just accept this is how it is in this moment. And that allows us to discharge all that psychic energy we would normally spend in judging ourselves or pushing away the feeling or distracting ourselves by, I mean, if we're angry, we might brush off a nasty email, or maybe we try to numb ourselves by eating or drinking an alcohol or some other substance. So if we can simply allow and give space to what arises without identifying with it, or if we do identify, to recognize that and soften a little the grip of self, of identification. This will allow the difficulty to pass. And we might get some wisdom in that way. Typically, when we are constricted and unbalanced, there's a sense of urgency. And we try pretty quickly to address this discomfort. In those moments, see if it's possible to pause and give it time and space. And then just seeing what happens. We get perspective from challenging emotions and experiences if we allow them to be. And this is how equanimity grows in us. And it applies from to a range of challenges, from somebody stealing your parking place to the grief that comes from a severe loss. The acceptance of difficulty brings balance and opens us up to compassion.